It's March 2005. Scott gets an invitation from the Boston FBI division. Without hesitation, he jumps on his motorcycle and shows up to the meeting. In the boardroom, he finds Detective Joe Cummings from Brockton PD, Detective Sergeant Mark Higginbottom from the Massachusetts State Troopers, and a federal agent from the Boston division. The agent slides a folder on the table. Scott picks it up and takes out its contents. He's having mixed feelings. On one hand, he's excited. This would take his career to another level. On the other hand, he's nervous. This could turn ugly real quick. The folder had information about the Outlaws. The Outlaws are known for engaging in various illegal activities, including drug trafficking, violence, intimidation, and more. Their practices involve maintaining a strict hierarchy and code of silence, making investigations extremely difficult, let alone infiltrating the club. In the early 2000s, the club had gone mainstream, and it would be almost impossible to break without having someone on the inside. And that would need to be Scott Payne. Scott takes a deep breath, shakes the team's hands, and signs the paperwork. The game is on. Operation Roadkill means that Scott has to infiltrate the Outlaws Club, build relationships, gather evidence, and betray them. Something that may look straightforward, but in reality, the steps are many, and patience is of the essence. Scott knows that before any first move, a tremendous work of preparation needs to be made. He locks himself in a room and goes through everything he can find in FBI files around the Outlaws. Their philosophies, their history, the key players, their lingo, their communication ways, and most importantly, their secret hangout spots. He not only has to go through this info, but he actually needs to remember everything by heart. Scott was given intel that some of the Outlaws frequent the same strip club the same night every week. They call it church, which is a mandatory hangout for key players of the club, during which they would discuss their plans for the next lick. A perfect place and time for Scott to show up and build rapport. But that wouldn't be that easy, especially for a foreign guy with a deep southern accent in Massachusetts. Scott needs a plan. The first thing in such an operation is to look the part. Fortunately for him, he already did. He's a big tatted up dude who's into rock and roll and who's had a criminal past in dealing narcotics. But that's not enough. Infiltrating the most secretive biker gang in America would take much more than dressing up. He identifies the times when the Outlaws are not in the strip club. He sits at the bar, chats with the club's crew, and sometimes plays a metal song when the club's not too busy. This was crucial to the whole operation. He needed to become a familiar face to the regulars. In case the Outlaws ask around about him, a good word would solidify his status of a non-threat. Days passed, and it was time for Scott to dive in. The FBI gave him intel that the gang will show up to church without wearing their colors. Black and white with the Outlaws emblem on the back of their jackets. This may seem a bit irrelevant, but in reality, an extremely important detail that would determine his approach. If they wear normal clothes, he'd be able to make small talk with the members and play dumb as if they were regulars. But if they wore their colors, he can't just walk up to them and ask to be their friend. That would probably get him jumped. It's church night, March 2005. Scott heads out to the strip club an hour before the Outlaws were scheduled to pull up. He gets himself a whiskey that he never touches and talks to a couple guys at the bar to get in the zone. Soon enough, here they come. About 12 Outlaws come in all at once. They don't talk to anyone and go straight to the back section of the club. But there's one big problem. They're wearing their colors. The intel was wrong. The Outlaws are revolutionary at heart. They like to challenge common belief and rebel against society. Most importantly, they're drawn towards rebellious people who show no signs of social awareness. And that's exactly what inspired Scott's strategy. He starts acting obnoxious, placing bets on pool games, high-fiving dudes, and telling funny stories to guys at the bar. Soon enough, he became the star of the show. The Outlaws definitely liked his attitude, but not enough to interact, at least for now. Scott takes a bathroom break. He's staring at the poster, thinking of his next move. The bathroom door opens. An outlaw walks in slowly. He peeks under the bathroom stalls. Only him and Scott are in the room. He quietly stands behind him. Scott turns around. In his mind, he's about to get whacked. He's not wearing a wire, which means his unit is not aware of what's happening inside. The outlaw presses him with questions. Who, where, when, how. He asks about random details like some of the meanings behind Scott's tattoo, where he bought his Harley. Scott can't bluff. Otherwise, he might get caught in a lie and risk it all. After a tough grilling, the outlaw asks Scott to come back the same time next week and walks off. Scott had just found his way in. The following week, Scott got invited to the Outlaws Northeast Regional Meet, which is called the Lobster Fest. Scott starts hanging around the Outlaws more and more, but he still needed to justify what is a country guy doing in Massachusetts. He needs a believable story. Since he grew up landscaping, he decides to tell everyone he was a site survey specialist. But eventually, he starts letting it be known that he's not just a legit businessman, and he does some criminal stuff too. He heard they were reporting vehicles stolen and getting their own insurance money, and they needed a reliable contact to sell them to and get rid of the cars. That contact was Scott. He started buying those vehicles off of them at a stolen price. They believed he was moving them to Mexico. In reality, the cars were in a warehouse somewhere. A few stolen cars later, Scott started gaining more trust. What at first started as reporting their own cars stolen became a whole car theft operation, and Scott was the go-to guy. He did all of this while dropping breadcrumbs about the fact that he used to be in the dope game and had contacts in the cartel. Soon enough, the Outlaws started delegating to him tasks in relation to their drug business, mostly transferring dope from one location to another and guarding the vehicles in between. Scott convinced the crew to move 40 kilos of coke and 1,000 pounds of weed to the cartel. Scott and his team were the supposed buyers. The whole thing was a setup, a massive sting to nail these guys on distribution charges. Everything's going smoothly. Scott's in a truck with 3 outlaws, the drugs stashed in secret compartments. They're a few miles away from the drop-off point. FBI agents are waiting to supposedly buy the load. Then, flashing lights and a cop car. They're getting pulled over. If they get busted, he's toast. He can't tell the cop he's undercover, especially with 3 armed outlaws in the truck. He'd be going to jail for years, or at least until Operation Roadkill was over. He hands over his fake ID. If the state trooper runs the ID through the system, it's over. The air in the truck is thick with tension. Nobody's making eye contact. The cop's getting suspicious. He starts to walk back to his car to run the ID, and then radio call. Backup needed. He practically throws the paperwork back at Scott and takes off. They're all breathing again. Scott floors it. They finish the delivery. The mission's accomplished, for now. Scott's got enough evidence to bring down a couple of guys, but that's not enough to him. He needed another operation. The game wasn't over. It was just getting started. The night after, Scott gets a phone call from Joe Doggs, the club's president.
Hey man, I want you to come over to the clubhouse. We're having church.
Without thinking much of it, Scott hops on his Harley and rides to the Outlaws clubhouse. He knocks on the door, Joe Doggs opens and says,
"We're not ready yet. I'll open in a second."
Scott is thinking something's weird. Why would they let him wait outside if they'd already called him up? 5 minutes later, Clothesline, the enforcer who's supposed to be his good buddy, opens up and says,
"Hey Tex, you got a minute?"
Scott follows him to the back of the clubhouse. One outlaw in front of him and another one behind him. Scott goes through the mystery door down a narrow stairway into a small basement. They brandish their weapons and ask him to strip completely naked. Things aren't looking good. Scott starts having an adrenaline dump. Everything slows down. He's asked to write down his full name, address, kids' names, and his wife's name. As Scott went to write his name down, Scott Calloway, he couldn't remember his middle name. He couldn't remember anything.
Being stripped in a basement at gunpoint is not a big deal if you're not wired. You're just naked. It's uncomfortable. It's cold. When you're wired, it's a big deal.
To gain some time, he does a distraction technique by asking a question. He hears them shouting up to a probate office.
Hey, what else do you need for that website?
Back then, there was this site, who'sarat.com. They put his info along with a picture, and the website would give them if he's fed or not. Scott knew he had to cover his tracks. He stripped down to his ankles, and that's when he remembered his middle name, finally, and wrote it down. Higgy the state trooper and Joe the Brockton police guy are stationed nearby. They don't know anything about what's going on in the clubhouse. The last time they heard him speak was before taking the stairs to the basement. They knew something was up. They immediately suited up and positioned their car facing the wall next to the basement. They're about to drive straight through the walls. This could kill everyone. The outlaw grabs a piece of clothing and says,
Hey, I'm not gonna find anything in here I don't want to, right?
he starts needing it. He starts looking at it, and he's going over this whole piece of clothing, and he looks right at it, but somehow doesn't see it. Scott has miraculously passed the sniff test. What's even better is that he continued transmitting the outlaws' conversations that whole night. He finally had enough evidence to put many outlaws behind bars. The team called backup and raided the outlaws' clubhouse. Scott's 2-year op led to 15 arrests. Scott is now an author, a keynote speaker, and is also pursuing a career in the film industry.
In the Outlaws case, when I was in the basement, that night on the way home, I had bought my wife, everybody knows them as burner phones now. So I bought her that phone and I'd call her no matter what time it was. We were young in our marriage, pretty young. That night when I called her, the first thing she said was, "Are you okay?" And I said, yeah, why? And she said, "I was driving tonight with the girls," and she said, "I got this overwhelming feeling." And she said, "I pulled over on the side of the road and I started praying for you." So I matched up the time is when I was in the basement.